It was a Thursday evening when the first crack appeared. I remember it clearly because I wasn't even supposed to be home yet. The trip to Greenville ended ahead of schedule, a rare win in an otherwise exhausting week of client meetings. I called Amanda as I was pulling onto the interstate, but it went straight to voicemail. I figured she was at yoga, or maybe on another one of her impromptu walks around the neighborhood. The one she said helped her clear her head. I didn't think much of it. I just kept driving. When I pulled into the driveway of our Charleston home around 6:30 p.m., the sun was just starting to dip behind the neighbor's rooftop, painting long shadows across the porch. Everything looked normal from the outside. The porch light already on, Amanda's car in its usual spot. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt something I couldn't explain. An undercurrent of stillness. Not the comforting kind. The kind that made your stomach go tight without warning. "Hey babe," I called out as I pushed the door closed behind me, trying to sound casual. "I'm home early." No response. I set my briefcase down and slipped off my shoes, listening for any sign of life. Footsteps upstairs, the clink of dishes in the sink, even the sound of the TV humming in the background. But the house was quiet. Not just empty. Quiet, like it was holding its breath. Then I saw it. 2 wine glasses sitting on the coffee table in the living room, right next to the folded gray throw we never used. One glass had a faint lipstick stain. Amanda's shade, a muted berry color she'd been obsessed with lately. But the other, that one had a different kind of mark. I leaned in, looking closer. It was a smudge. A thick one, too big, too blunt to be hers. My stomach turned as I realized what I was seeing. The imprint of a man's lips. Whoever he was, he hadn't even wiped the rim before setting it down. Next to the armchair was a jacket, neatly folded over the back like someone had placed it there intentionally. It was navy with a tan suede collar. Expensive looking, casual but tailored. Not mine. I reached out and ran my hand across the sleeve. It was still warm, still holding the heat of someone who'd worn it recently. I turned toward the hallway, heart rate kicking up, and noticed faint trails of steam slipping out from under the bathroom door. The kind of steam that only came from a hot shower, one that had just ended. The mirror was probably still fogged up in there. I stood frozen for a second, the pieces clinking together in my head, refusing to settle into a full picture. That's when the front door opened. Amanda walked in with a grocery bag balanced on her hip and her keys dangling from one finger. She smiled as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "Oh, you're home already?" she said, visibly startled. "You weren't supposed to be back until 10. I watched her closely. She was wearing leggings and an oversized sweater. The kind of outfit she usually wore when she wanted to signal she wasn't trying to impress anyone. Her hair was tied back, no makeup. But something about the way she blinked, too fast, too often, didn't sit right with me. "Meeting ended early," I said, forcing my voice to sound even. "I figured I'd beat traffic." She nodded and made her way into the kitchen, setting the bag on the counter like it was just another day, like we hadn't skipped over the fact that someone else had clearly been here. I followed her gaze as she glanced back at the wine glasses. "Oh," she said, as if remembering. "Nate came by earlier. Internet was acting up again, and I didn't feel like messing with the router." "Was he the one who took a shower?" I asked. Her hands stilled on the grocery bag for a beat before she resumed unpacking. "No, that was me. I went for a run this afternoon and got all sweaty. You know how gross it gets this time of year." It wasn't a lie exactly. Amanda did run, but she hadn't mentioned going today, and she usually came back red-faced and drained. Not calm and perfectly composed like this. I nodded slowly. "And the jacket?" "Oh, that's Nate's," she said. "It started to drizzle, and he didn't want to carry it back. Said he'd grab it tomorrow." I studied her. She was answering quickly, with just the right amount of detail to sound convincing, but not enough to explain everything. She hadn't asked why I was home early. She didn't seem flustered by the timing. In fact, it felt like she'd already practiced this conversation in her head. And just when I thought she was finished, she turned around, leaned against the counter, and tilted her head like she was ready to scold me. "You know, Jack, it's kind of funny you're all suspicious," she said, voice cool but laced with irritation. You're barely ever home anymore. I can't remember the last time we had dinner together without you checking your email the whole time. I blinked. What does that have to do with anything? I'm just saying, she said, lifting a bag of spinach out of the tote and tossing it into the fridge. Maybe if you were around a little more, I wouldn't always have to call the neighbor for help. There it was, the pivot. A clean redirect from wine glasses and foreign jackets to my work schedule. She had turned the whole situation on its head so fast, I barely had time to question the absurdity of it. Somehow, I was now the one being scrutinized. I didn't answer. I didn't trust myself to say anything without sounding accusatory, and the last thing I wanted was to give her more ammo. Instead, I walked upstairs and into our bedroom, where I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the framed photo on Amanda's nightstand. One from our trip to Asheville a couple of years ago. She was leaning into me, laughing, a wind-blown strand of hair stuck to her cheek. I looked happy in that picture, naively happy. That night at dinner, we didn't speak much. Amanda scrolled through her phone while eating grilled chicken and quinoa, her usual go-to when she was trying to seem balanced and in control. I pushed my food around, replaying the scene from earlier over and over in my head. The wine glasses, the jacket, the steam, the timing, her rehearsed explanations, and most of all, the way she flipped the narrative so quickly, making me the problem. I told myself I might be overthinking it, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That night, I didn't sleep. Amanda curled up beside me like she always did, completely at ease, one hand resting lightly on my chest like nothing was out of the ordinary. I lay there wide awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing every creak of the house and every car that passed on the street outside. My mind wouldn't stop turning. The image of those wine glasses looped in my head. I saw them every time I closed my eyes. I thought about the heat still lingering in that jacket, the bathroom mirror probably still fogged when I'd walked in. And then there was Amanda's reaction, too smooth, too fast. Not caught off guard, just prepared. But it wasn't just that evening. As I lay in the dark, the weight of the past few months started to press on me like wet cement. Little things I'd brushed off suddenly took on new shape. Her new obsession with yoga, the way she sprinted to the shower as soon as she got home, even when she barely looked winded. The girls' nights that were popping up more often, though her stories about them grew shorter and vaguer each time. And the tech changes. She'd started changing her phone passcode every couple weeks. Her laptop, which once sat open on the kitchen table while she browsed Pinterest or emailed coworkers, was now guarded like a state secret. If I walked into the room too quickly, she'd click out of whatever she was doing before I could see the screen. Then there were the purchases. Amanda had always been savvy with money. She used to brag about her sale finds, the coupons she stacked to get half-off spa treatments. But lately, unfamiliar charges had started showing up on our joint credit card. Boutique clothing stores I didn't recognize. Restaurant names that never came up in conversation. A sushi place downtown, she hated sushi. I had asked once, casually, if she was treating a friend, and she'd smiled and said, "You know I'm always the generous one," before changing the subject. But maybe the worst part? She seemed happier. I know that sounds strange. Most people would think happiness is a good thing. But it was the kind of happiness that didn't include me. She laughed at her phone more. She had this lightness in her step again. Not like she was relaxed, but like she was distracted by something that kept her floating a few inches above everything else, including me. The next morning, I pretended to sleep when she got up, listening to her move around the room. She hummed to herself while brushing her hair, then tapped quickly on her phone for a few minutes. I cracked one eye open just enough to see her screen angled away, thumb darting over it in rapid little bursts. A smirk flashed across her face before she put the phone down. By the time I got out of bed, she was in the kitchen, sipping her coffee with one leg crossed over the other, scrolling through Instagram like it was any other Saturday. She looked up and smiled. "You want eggs?" she asked, already reaching for the carton. "I was just about to make some." I paused. "Sure. Cool. Scrambled?" "Yeah." She turned back to the stove and started cracking eggs into a bowl like we hadn't spent the night sleeping beside an unspoken wall. like nothing was off. As she cooked, I leaned against the counter and watched her. For a moment, it hit me how well I used to know this woman. I knew the exact way her nose crinkled when she laughed too hard, the songs she sang in the car when she thought no one was listening, and the weird way she always twisted the cap on the milk 3 times before putting it back in the fridge. But that morning, I realized I hadn't heard her laugh in front of me in a while. Not really. Not like before. She placed a plate in front of me. Hot sauce. No, I'm good. We ate in silence, the TV on in the background playing muted news. Amanda glanced at her phone every minute or two, smiling softly to herself as she texted. When I looked up, she caught me watching and tilted her head. "What?" she asked, a little playfully, a little defensive. I shrugged. "Nothing. Just thinking." She nodded, turning her attention back to her phone. "Big day today. I've got that long yoga workshop at Indigo. Don't wait up, they might do a wine thing after." My fork froze midair. A wine thing? Yeah, tasting or maybe just a hangout. I don't know, Lisa was talking about it. She stood and started rinsing her plate. "You should do something for yourself too. Go golfing or whatever it is you guys do when you're avoiding real emotions." That little jab would have once made me laugh. Not today. After she left, yoga mat slung over her shoulder, hair twisted up in a high bun. I stood at the living room window and watched her back out of the driveway. Her taillights disappeared down the street, and I didn't move for a long time. Eventually, I walked into the bedroom and grabbed her laptop. I wasn't proud of it, but I had to know. Of course, the password had changed. Again. I stared at the login screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. My brain ran through possibilities, her birthday, our anniversary, the name of her first pet. But none of them worked. I tried Yoga Girl as a joke. No luck. After 5 failed attempts, I gave up. I felt sick to my stomach. Not just from suspicion, but from how far we'd fallen. This was the woman who once handed me her phone to choose a Spotify playlist on road trips. Now I couldn't even get into her laptop without feeling like I was breaking into a stranger's life. That afternoon, I started checking our credit card statement more carefully. I pulled up the app and scrolled. Sure enough, 3 days ago, a charge from Salt and Cedar, a waterfront bistro we'd never been to together. I knew the place. It was expensive, romantic. Next to it, a Lyft ride that ended downtown around 10:42 p.m. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. That night, when Amanda came home, she smelled faintly of jasmine and sandalwood. Not the usual lemony yoga studio scent. Her cheeks were flushed, and she tossed her phone on the entry table before heading straight upstairs. "Long class?" I asked. She paused. "Yeah, really intense stretching. We grabbed wine afterward." "Where at?" She hesitated. "Just someplace near the studio. I don't even remember the name. Lisa picked it." That was the moment I knew she was lying. Amanda always remembered the names of restaurants. She'd come home from brunch and rave about some farm-to-table place that served lavender lattes and oat milk pancakes. But tonight, she didn't remember. I didn't say anything. I didn't even flinch. I just nodded and went back to reading the article I wasn't actually reading. She didn't notice. The next morning, I decided to try something different. A test. I asked her if she wanted to go downtown together next Saturday. Dinner, maybe a movie. Her face lit up a little too fast. "Oh, I'd love to, but I already told the girls I'd meet them for a beach walk. Can we rain check?" "Sure," I said. "Maybe next weekend." "Definitely." But we wouldn't. We never did. That week, I started making notes on my phone, dates, locations, charges. I was building a map of her movements. Not because I wanted to trap her, because I needed to understand. I started driving different routes home, keeping an eye out downtown, glancing through coffee shop windows. More than once, I thought I saw her, or someone who looked like her, sitting across from a man whose face I couldn't quite make out. Once, I followed a Lyft for 4 blocks before realizing it wasn't even hers. I was spiraling. I knew it, but I also knew something was happening, and I was the only one willing to admit it. By Friday, I was exhausted. Amanda told me she'd be out late again. "Networking," she said. Some project work. I nodded. Have fun. She kissed me on the cheek and grabbed her purse. I will. And she did. I stood in the doorway and watched her walk to her car, phone already in her hand, texting someone she didn't want me to know about. She didn't even look back. It was a week later. Exactly 7 days after the night I watched Amanda walk out the door texting someone she swore I didn't need to know about, when I finally saw it with my own eyes. Up until that point, it had been a slow, torturous unraveling. Hints, fragments, half-truths, an unfamiliar cologne on her sweater. A Lyft ride at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday. A receipt from a restaurant in her purse with 2 entrees and 2 glasses of wine. Dated on a night she said she was too tired to meet me for dinner. All little pieces of a puzzle that had started forming a picture I didn't want to see, but couldn't ignore anymore. That morning, I woke up with a pit in my stomach that I couldn't shake. It was a Saturday, and Amanda had told me she was spending the afternoon with some of the girls doing downtown research for an upcoming design project. She tossed out the names Lisa and Claire, though the last time I asked to meet them, she deflected like I was asking to sit in on a board meeting. I didn't tell her I had other plans. I just kissed her forehead and wished her luck. Then I waited an hour, grabbed my keys, and left the house without a destination. Only a gut instinct I'd learned to stop second-guessing. Charleston isn't that big of a city when you're looking for someone. Around 2:15 p.m. I ended up near the waterfront, where the city starts to feel less like a historic port town and more like a postcard. The kind of place where couples stroll hand in hand, and tourists take pictures of their overpriced seafood like they've discovered a new continent. I wasn't expecting to find her there. I was just driving, trying to convince myself I was wrong, that I'd pass the cafes and bistros and see nothing familiar. No Amanda. No betrayal. Just peace. Then I saw her. She was seated at a windowside table at Salt and Cedar, the same place from the credit card statement. Her back was to the glass, but I'd know the curve of her shoulders anywhere. She was leaning in close, laughing in that effortless, magnetic way she used to reserve for our private jokes. I parked across the street and got out of the car, pulse racing, every step toward that window louder than the last. And then I saw him. He was wearing a blue blazer over a white shirt, sleeves pushed up just enough to look casual, hair slightly tousled like he wanted to seem like he didn't try, but absolutely did. He was handsome, confident, and far too comfortable sitting that close to my wife. His hand rested on the table, fingers brushing hers as she talked. And Amanda, she wasn't pulling away. She was glowing, animated. Her smile wasn't the polite kind she gave to neighbors or coworkers. It was the soft, and asterisk mate one I hadn't seen in months. The one I used to think was mine. Then she did it. She leaned forward, touched his cheek with the backs of her fingers, and kissed it. Soft, deliberate. Not a friendly peck, not a greeting. A kiss meant to say I've missed you. My world didn't crash in that moment. It didn't shatter or explode. It simply settled, like the final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place, and the whole picture finally made sense. She wasn't just exploring space or leaning into a modern marriage, like she'd half-joked about in one of our more strained conversations weeks back. She wasn't just stressed or overwhelmed or figuring things out. Amanda had made her choice, quietly, carefully, completely, and it wasn't me. I stepped back from the window, my breath fogging up the glass just briefly before I turned away. I didn't go in. I didn't confront her. I didn't slam the table and demand answers, because the answer was right there, in her eyes, in the way she smiled at him, in the way she wasn't when she was around me anymore. I got in my car and drove home. The air in the house felt different when I walked back in. It wasn't haunted anymore. It was just quiet. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't consumed by uncertainty. The guessing was over. The wondering. The justifications I'd made on her behalf. The conversations I'd replayed until they were stripped of all meaning. Amanda had crossed the line. And she'd done it with the kind of ease that only comes from practice. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the fridge. On the side panel was a photo from 2 Christmases ago. The 2 of us in Vermont, bundled up in matching coats, holding mugs of hot cider and grinning like we'd figured it all out. I got up, pulled the magnet off, and dropped the photo into the trash. Then I pulled out my laptop. It was time to start making plans. Not revenge. Not drama. Just a plan to get my life back, piece by piece. I opened a new document and titled it Exit. Over the next few hours, I listed everything that had changed in our relationship in the last year. Not just the infidelity, though that now formed the backbone, but all of it. Her distance. Her sudden bursts of defensiveness. The way she'd started blaming me for things that didn't even make sense. How I'd gone from partner to obstacle in her eyes. Then I started logging the patterns. The gym nights that always ran late. The client dinners that conveniently never included spouses. The new lingerie I hadn't seen her wear. The Saturdays that started at brunch with Lisa but ended with dead batteries and unreturned texts. And now, salt and cedar. Blue blazer. Kiss on the cheek. I felt everything and nothing at once. When Amanda came home that evening, she was glowing with that same quiet confidence. A woman who had the kind of day she wanted with the person she wanted. She placed her keys on the counter, took off her shoes, and gave me a quick kiss on the forehead. "How was your day?" she asked, dropping her bag. I smiled. "Productive." She nodded and grabbed a seltzer from the fridge. "I'm beat. Mind if I take a shower before we eat?" "Go ahead," I said. She disappeared upstairs, humming some song under her breath. I listened to the water turn on, then clicked the laptop shut. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel like flipping the table or interrogating her. I felt done. Not in a cynical, burned-out way. In a clear, peaceful kind of way. Like someone who had spent enough time digging for answers and was finally ready to climb out. Amanda had turned our marriage into an open field without telling me I was standing in it. She wanted freedom. Well, now she'd have it. All of it. And I'd have mine. After seeing Amanda with him, blue blazer, warm laughs, that soft kiss on the cheek, something inside me shifted. Not instantly and not in some grand cinematic way. It was more like a thread had finally snapped, and I could breathe again without realizing how tight my chest had been for months. I didn't confront her. I didn't even mention the restaurant. That surprised me. A version of myself, the old me, would have marched in and asked her who he was, demanded the truth, maybe even begged for an explanation. But I already had all the answers I needed. She'd made her choice. I didn't need to validate it with a confession. What I needed now was space. Not physical space, but internal space. I needed to remember who I was before I became the guy who waited by the window while his wife lied to his face. I didn't want to just survive this. I wanted to reclaim something. So I started small. That Monday, I signed up for a gym membership. Not the kind with basketball courts and smoothie bars, a real one. Old iron, rubber mats, chalk in the air. I told Amanda I was trying to get back in shape, and she barely blinked, just said, "That's great, babe," while scrolling through her phone, probably texting him. First, it was hard. My body ached in ways I hadn't felt since college. But I showed up every morning at 6:30 a.m. and pushed through. Deadlifts, rows, pull-ups I could barely finish. It wasn't about vanity, it was about control. About showing up for something that didn't lie to me. A week later, I dug through the back of my closet and pulled out the clothes I hadn't worn in years. Not because they were out of style, but because they reminded me of who I used to be before I shrank into Amanda's shadow. I took a long look in the mirror, ran a hand through my hair, and made a decision. That weekend I went shopping. Not like a full-blown makeover, but enough to signal to the world and to myself that I wasn't invisible anymore. A few well-fitted shirts. A pair of boots I didn't think I could pull off, but did anyway. A leather jacket that didn't look like it belonged in a clearance rack or a midlife crisis. Amanda noticed. She didn't say much, but I caught her watching me once as I buttoned up a clean white Oxford shirt for a networking event downtown. There was a flicker in her eyes. Confusion? Jealousy? Recognition? I don't know. I didn't ask. "You going somewhere?" she asked, leaning on the doorframe. "Yeah," I said, adjusting my collar. "There's a mixer at Levy. Just a few people from work and some local creatives." She blinked. "You never mentioned that." I shrugged. Didn't think you'd be interested. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Eventually, she just nodded and left the room. That night was the first time in months I felt like myself. The bar buzzed with conversation and soft lighting. The air filled with a mix of cologne, perfume, and ambition. I met people not in a forced way but real, natural introductions. There were handshakes, laughs, even the occasional, "So what's your story?" from someone who wasn't trying to sell me something. And then there was Molly. She introduced herself over bourbon and a shared comment about how bad the music was. She worked at a creative agency, brand strategy, storytelling, visual identity. She had this quiet confidence about her, the kind that didn't beg for attention but commanded it anyway. We talked for maybe 20 minutes, but it felt like 10 seconds. Easy, warm, no masks. I didn't flirt, not directly, and I didn't offer up my whole situation. But when she asked if I had a partner or family, I just said, "Married for now," and left it at that. She didn't pry. She just nodded and said, "Sometimes chapters end." Before we moved on to less heavy topics like favorite podcasts and Charleston food spots. That night, when I came home, Amanda was already in bed. She looked up from her phone, her voice light. "Late night." "Not really," I said, setting my keys on the dresser. "Fun." I paused. "Yeah, actually, yeah." She didn't respond, just looked at me for a long second, then turned off her lamp. The next few weeks blurred by in quiet contrast. I kept my routine. Early gym sessions, cleaner eating, fewer hours wasted trying to guess where Amanda was or who she was with. I stopped checking her phone logs. I stopped hovering around her lies. It was like the more attention I gave myself, the less oxygen her secrecy had to thrive in. She noticed. She started asking questions. "Where have you been lately? You're dressing up a lot. Anyone I should know about? You're not waiting for me to eat anymore?" Each time, I just smiled and said, "Just been busy," and let the silence after my words hang like punctuation. The funny thing is, Amanda had always assumed she'd be the one to flourish if things ever changed. She was the social one, the attractive one, the flirt. She talked once, half-jokingly, about how an open relationship might not be so bad. That was months ago when she still thought she held all the cards. She believed I'd never be able to catch up, that I'd be the one standing still while she ran free. But something had shifted. Now I was the one with options. My phone buzzed with texts from people I actually wanted to hear from. I had dinner invites. I was meeting designers, copywriters, startup people, artists. Women smiled at me. They didn't know my story, they just liked the version of me that showed up. And so did I. Meanwhile, Amanda's world got quieter. I noticed she stopped going out as often. The late nights turned into early evenings. She started making dinner again, nothing fancy, but the gesture felt off. Performed. She asked if I wanted to try a new Netflix show together. I said I was busy. She bought a bottle of my favorite bourbon, just because, and I thanked her, then left it unopened for days. Once, I caught her glancing at my phone while it buzzed on the counter. She asked casually, "Who's Molly?" Like she was tasting the name. I smiled. "Someone I met. She's interesting." Amanda didn't respond. She just nodded and walked away. I never gave her the satisfaction of asking about him. Never mentioned the blue blazer, the wine glasses, or the kiss at Salt and Cedar. That part of my life, the detective phase, the need for confirmation, was over. Now I was writing a new story, and Amanda wasn't the main character anymore. One night, as I left the house for another small event, just a few people I'd met through a startup circle, Amanda stepped into the hallway and blocked the door. "You've changed," she said, arms crossed. "Yeah," I said. "I have." She stared at me. "Are you seeing someone?" I didn't flinch. "Not in the way you mean." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm living my life, Amanda. Something I should have started doing a long time ago." For a moment, she looked like she might cry. Not from sadness, but from disbelief. Like she was finally starting to realize that I wasn't chasing her anymore. That she could no longer use her guilt or beauty or excuses to pull me back into orbit. "I never meant to hurt you," she said quietly. I know, I replied. But you did. And I'm just not letting it define me anymore. I stepped around her, opened the door, and walked out. And just like that, the tide turned not with fury, but with focus. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about showing Amanda what she lost. It was about rediscovering what I still had. If you told me 3 months ago that I'd be looking forward to Wednesday nights, I would have laughed in your face. Back then, they were just markers, middle-of-the-week placeholders between client deadlines and long commutes home. Amanda was usually busy on Wednesdays anyway, either out with coworkers or catching up on emails, which I later learned meant, well, we know what it meant. But now, Wednesday nights had started to mean something else, something better. It all started with a simple invite from Molly. She texted, "Hey, there's a creative mixer at the terrace room next week. Low-key, wine, music, weird art. You'd love it. Come?" It wasn't a date. At least I didn't read it that way. But the idea of showing up somewhere where I didn't feel like a ghost, where no one knew me as Amanda's husband or that guy who always takes the calls outside, that was more than appealing, it felt necessary. So I went, and it was electric. Not in the loud, over-the-top way that parties can be. It was the hum of creative energy, people who were passionate, weird, present. There were painters, UX designers, photographers, a guy who claimed to build experiential scent installations, whatever that meant. The walls were covered in local art, and the jazz band played off-key but didn't care. And Molly? She lit up the room the moment she walked in. Not because she tried to, quite the opposite. She moved through people with ease, arms open, voice warm, making people feel seen. I stood by the bar at first, unsure if I should play the wall or dive in, but she found me fast. "There you are," she said, bumping her shoulder into mine. "Thought you might bail." "Almost did," I admitted. "Glad you didn't." She smiled. "Come on. I want to introduce you to some people." That night, I met more new faces than I had in the last 2 years combined. They weren't networking in the transactional sense, no business cards, no elevator pitches. They were just interested in people, in stories. And for the first time in a long time, I had a story to tell that wasn't about my marriage falling apart. By the end of the night, I had 3 invites to upcoming dinners, a podcast guest request from a guy named Jonah, and a note from someone named Bree who said I looked like the kind of guy who knows the best bourbon spots. I didn't even know what I said to her. I was just being myself, not trying to impress anyone, just present. When I got home that night, Amanda was already asleep, or pretending to be. The lamp on her side of the bed was off, but I saw the faint glow of her phone screen lighting up the edge of the sheets. I didn't ask. I didn't care. I undressed quietly, slipped into bed, and felt a calm I hadn't known in months. The next morning, she asked, "Did you have fun last night?" "Yeah," I said, pouring coffee. "Actually, I really did." She didn't ask who I was with. She didn't need to. Over the next few weeks, my social calendar filled like a cup that had been bone dry for too long. Not all of it involved Molly, though yeah, we crossed paths often. There was a gallery opening in West Ashley. A weekend hike with a group of guys I met through the gym, no drama, just sweat and sarcasm. I joined a book club. Not kidding. Thursday nights. Half the members were women, most of them smart, confident, emotionally fluent. The kind of people Amanda had always dismissed as a little too much. One of them, Kate, worked in interior design and asked me over coffee if I was single. I told her it was complicated. She raised an eyebrow. Complicated like working on it? Or complicated like over but the paperwork's still in progress? Somewhere in between, I said. She nodded, no judgment. Fair enough. You let me know when it's the latter. I laughed. Not because I thought anything would happen, but because it felt good to be wanted, to be seen. Amanda, meanwhile, began to notice the shift. She came home early one Friday, which was unusual in itself, and found me in the backyard setting up string lights. A couple friends were coming over. Nothing major, just drinks, some music, a fire pit. I hadn't thought to tell her. Not because I was hiding it, but because it didn't feel like something that involved her anymore. "You're hosting?" she asked, voice tilting upward like she didn't believe what she was seeing. Yeah, I said, screwing in a bulb. Just some folks from the creative circle. Thought I'd bring it here for once. She watched me for a long beat. Should I make myself scarce? I looked over. Up to you. In the end, she stayed, but not for long. She hovered awkwardly around the snacks, introduced herself to a couple people, then disappeared upstairs like a guest who didn't know where she fit anymore. I didn't chase her. The people who stayed were laughing, connecting, talking about ideas that mattered. Molly came late, after her agency's shoot, but when she arrived, she brought this lightness with her, like someone who wasn't afraid of being late because she knew she belonged. We sat by the fire pit until well past midnight, just the two of us by the end, talking about why people fall out of love without noticing. I think sometimes, she said, people confuse familiar with safe, and then they mistake safe for happy, but they're not always the same thing. I looked at her. Yeah, I think I did that for a long time. She nodded, then said softly, "You don't seem unhappy now." And I wasn't. I woke up the next morning feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Momentum. Like my life was actually moving forward, in my own direction. Amanda noticed again in the subtle ways. She lingered more when I walked by, commented on my clothes more often. One night, she asked me if I wanted to watch a movie. I said I had plans. She asked with who. I just said, people. That answer used to drive me crazy when she gave it. Now it was my turn. A few days later, she left a bottle of my favorite cologne on my dresser. No note, just the bottle. I didn't acknowledge it, but I noticed she hadn't used the jasmine lotion she used to wear when she was out with him. That scent, the one that once sent my stomach into knots, was gone. The power dynamic had changed. Her silence became louder. Mine became calm. This was never about getting even. It wasn't about playing games or making Amanda jealous. The truth is, I didn't even think about him anymore. He was just a detail now, part of a chapter one no longer needed to reread. What mattered was that I was no longer walking through life half awake, waiting for someone else to choose me. I had already chosen myself.